Hey everyone, Nathan Long here, president of Saybrook University. Welcome to another episode of Saybrook Insights. Today's interview is our first 2-for-1 with Dr. Marina Smirnova and Mr. Richard Rudd. We're covering an interesting topic. It's something I'm not too familiar with, so lots of questions coming about and curiosities that I hold around the art of contemplation, the dream arc concept, as well as the gene keys system. These all lie, especially the art of contemplation, lie at the center of Gene Keys, a spiritual program developed by Mr. Rudd and embraced by Dr. Smirnova. And there are quite a few practical applications that you'll hear about and we'll talk about in today's episode. There are connections to human design, meditation, mindfulness, and much more. So lots to learn and lots of interesting pathways to potentially explore down the road. All right, let's get to it with Mr. Richard Rudd and Dr. Marina Smirnova. Mr. Richard Rudd and Dr. Marina Smirnova, thank you so much for joining me today on Saybrook Insights. Perhaps each of you could take just a couple of minutes to talk about your backgrounds, where you're from, how you ended up doing the work you're doing, and your connection to Saybrook University. Richard, I know this is maybe tangential territory into Saybrook, but I think you've got the fabulous Dr. Smirnova here as your connection. So either one of you, kick it off.
I guess I'll start with, I attended Edinburgh University, and I'm a lover of English literature and always have been, and especially got interested early on in the poetry of the, not just English but just across the world. I became a real lover of poetry and specialized in that, and then I guess to cut a story short. I had a kind of major mystical experience in my late 20s. I spent my 20s traveling the world. I had a small inheritance that I got, and I spent it all in my 20s traveling the world, and and literally went everywhere you can imagine, from the Arctic to the Americas to everywhere, and had a lot of adventures. But then I had a big experience in my late 20s that kind of shook my life and changed the direction of my life. I was going to go into the wine and spirit industry, which is my family heritage, 300 years of wine merchants in my lineage. And but then I had this experience, and I went in a different direction, and I ended up studying with lots of different teachers around the world, studying kind of, I guess, what you'd call the perennial philosophy, the great wisdom traditions of the world. And that's what's taken me on this long journey, and to meet amazing people like Marina and yourself, and come here and talk to you. So that's the very short version.
So before we get into that, Richard, how did you and Marina come into contact with one another? I'm curious.
I'm trying to remember how did we get, you wrote to me, Marina.
Yes, Richard, indeed, I did.
Why don't you say how that happened for you, and then I'll pick it up.
My name is Marina, and I came apart, came across Richard's writings as I was researching and looking for proper materials for a new class we were developing. And that course is Interdisciplinary Foundations for Vibrant Longevity. Needless to say, it's a holistic approach. So I was looking for something that would truly address the all levels we human beings are functioning on, and even with full awareness or otherwise. And one of my searches certainly yielded Richard's work, and I just could not believe what I stumbled upon. So I reached out, and it was just a simple message through a website, and thanking him for his work and letting him know that I uh, know that our students would absolutely enjoy considering his work and looking into this as one of many options that they have. And Richard reached out. Before we knew it, we have invited him to our residential virtual that we held virtually last fall. And certainly for consciousness, spirituality, and integrative health specialization students, discussions that he and also Rosie offered were incredible. And students to this very day, and I'm sure that will continue, speak to Richard's work and also to the Dream Arc. And I'm sure that Richard, you will mention that earlier, mentioned this in our conversation too. So that's how we connected.
Very nice. Now, Marina, how did you find your way to Saybrook University over all these years? For the record, for full disclosure, Marina is a full-time faculty member, I think assistant professor, associate
Full
professor.
professor now. Yes, full professor.
Full. Oh, you're full. Okay, congratulations. That's fabulous. All right. I should know this, so bad president. All right. So so tell us how you found Saybrook and a little bit about your journey if you don't mind. That'd be great.
I was born on a island, Sakhalin Island, north of Japan, and a very, very far east of the former Soviet Union. And so I was born, grew up in, and was received my bachelor's degree in the former Soviet Union. So coming to the United States, immigrating to the United States over 20 years ago was certainly a voyage of my life. And I continued teaching music, and that was my first love. I started teaching when I was 18. And then I found counseling and psychology, and most likely, counseling and psychology found me. So, just as I could think of, I found Saybrook, but in truth, Saybrook found me. That's how it happened. It happened in 2013 when I completed my doctoral degree in psychology, specifically with transpersonal psychology concentration at Institute of Transpersonal Psychology and now Sophia University. So since then, it has been my academic and also relational home. And Richard, I'm so glad that you are also now contributing to Saybrook.
Very good, very good. Marina, what was your musical background, by the way? Remind me again.
Yeah, so I had a little bit of everything. So choral, vocal, and instrumental. Piano is my instrument.
Oh, very good, very good. All right. I have a lot of affinity and affection for my Russian pianist counterparts. We had growing up and in my undergraduate days, my primary accompanist in my soloing work was just a fabulous pianist from Russia, Soviet Russia at the time. So she had immigrated over here. So, and I'm still glad you're doing it because I think you're very much still involved in that work, as I understand it.
Yes, I'm rekindling that music work.
Rekindling
Yes,
it.
rekindling this because this never leaves me. And if we, really look at this, music as one of the most transpersonal arts and one of the most transcendent arts because here we go, as Richard speaks about his work about pausing. Yes, and taking a pause and leaning into this pause. Music really teaches us when we look at scores, the rest are there. The poses are there.
That's very much the case. So true, so true. Well, thank you, Marita, for that very lovely introduction. So, Richard, as we get into your journey, right? So, you gave us a really beautiful, concise but beautiful overview of your background. I'd love to pick your brain more about the wine and spirits industry, but we can do that offline. So, the established poet, spiritualist, author positions that you've occupied in life. How can we really get a handle on your current ethos, this art of contemplation, which lies at the core of your overall program, Gene Keys, which we can get into a little bit more later on. What is this approach around contemplation exactly, and how can it help us with daily suffering? How does one do it? What are all the components to that part? And I know it's central to Gene Keys, but I think this is a key aspect.
Yeah, no, it's a standalone kind of view of life, and it's also a technique and an art. I call it an art for a reason. It's more than a technique. It's a way of living, and I think it's as old as the hills. So I'm by no means like it's nothing new, but I I think, found a way of presenting it so that it's very easy for people to kind of pick it up and immediately feel some change, some beneficial change in their lives. And it essentially it is about creating an internal, reality, and a place that you can go inside yourself that you can rely on, different from meditation, because meditation generally, as we understand it, there are lots of different types of meditation, but it's more of a focused, closing the eyes, going inside. And for many types of meditation, it's about watching your thoughts, or even eliminating thought might be one of its goals. Contemplation is a little bit wider, and perhaps a little bit closer to mindfulness, but also I would say, much more creative than mindfulness. Because in contemplation, you can use your mind, you can shape your mind, your thoughts. You start with your thinking, but the idea is to go deeper than one's thinking. And the notion behind contemplation is that we have inside us a store of wisdom. And unlike knowledge, wisdom is something on the inside that has to come out, as knowledge, you might say, is something on the outside that we take in. And so perhaps a different way of looking at it. So the art of contemplation is about creating a space so that that wisdom that's hidden inside us can emerge, and then can apply itself to the problems of life or existence, or indeed doesn't even have to be problems. It can enhance our skills and our gifts. And that's why I use it in combination with my other set of teachings, the gene keys, because that's about giving us specific skills that we can then enhance. But on its own, it's a beautiful practice, and as Marina said, one of the foundations of contemplation is to learn how to pause in life. So pausing is the first of 3 levels or techniques. And the other 2 lie inside pausing. So unless you learn the first one, the other 2 don't really manifest. And so pausing it can be many, many things. A pause can be just as short as an in-breath or a sigh, or a pause can be a week in between doing things. And what we often do in our modern world is we rush from one thing to the next without pausing in between. So when we look at life and nature, and one of the things that we see is that it's always pausing. If you watch an animal or a bird or an insect, you will see that they regularly pause to come into deeper awareness of their environment, whether they're listening through their senses or they're picking up something, or even think of something as mundane as a fly that comes and lands on your arm, and then you brush it away, and then it comes back again, and you're, why does it do this? And the fly, in a way, is giving us a moment to pause. It's pausing, and it's maybe saying to us, you need to pause a little bit more often. So when you start listening to life like this, you begin to realize that pauses are everywhere. And then you start to harvest them. And a day without pauses is to me, it's a stressful day. A day with pauses is a very peaceful day, is a very rhythmic day. And so once you learn this skill of just taking regular pauses and beginning to find them, and beginning to find a way of pausing, your day, the rhythm of your day, the timing of your day, the synchronicity of your day, and your health and everything starts to find a much better flow all around you. So that's the sort of foundation. So I'll pause there in case you want to ask anything.
Hang on, I have a fly on my arm.
That's good, Nathan. That's great.
Yeah, it's a fabulous example. Actually, it was very good. I just it was very poignant for me because I had a host of flies in my office the other day. I was curious, when you look at and think about how this manifests in an individual, and I have no doubt, based on what you're saying, this is going to present itself differently depending on the individual, the context, etc. But generally speaking, how does one practice the art of contemplation in your mind? And it sounds like there are steps involved. So maybe just walk us through sort of the basic arc of this a little bit, and then I have a few more follow-up questions for you.
So pausing is fundamental because if contemplation means to go, to go into the inner temple. That's what the word comes from. And so unless you pause, your awareness doesn't go in, and then the contemplative impulse isn't engaged. So you have to create that space, and you have to create it regularly. So there are basically two ways you can contemplate. You can begin with a problem or a challenge. As many of our great teachers, scientists, academics, whatever, they start to contemplate a problem. And then once you start to contemplate it, it goes in your mind. It starts to revolve in and spin through you. And then perhaps you put it down and you forget about it, and you go and do something else. And then it comes back. And often when it comes back with an insight that's sort of emerged. And so you carry on and you go deeper. And actually, the magic usually happens when you're not looking. When you're doing something else, or when you've had a dream, or you've fallen asleep, and then you wake up the next morning and there's the answer. And so that's the sort of fundamental basis of contemplation, of contemplating on a problem or a challenge. But you then have to go a little bit deeper than that. So it's not, we can use it at that level, but we can also use it at a deeper level, which is an emotional level. So that's the mental one. At an emotional level, as you might contemplate something really. I mean, I often ask people, like, what's the biggest challenge in your life right now? Everyone knows what it is. And then you start to contemplate it. You start to create a space for it inside yourself, and you basically open to the possibility that there might be a gift somewhere hidden in this very difficult situation. And so you open to that, and then the contemplative impulse takes you deeper and deeper and deeper into the subject material. And after a while of focusing on it and then forgetting about it and focusing and forgetting, it starts to ripen inside you, and it starts to affect your awareness, and life starts to give you cues. But perhaps a snatch in a conversation, or perhaps something happens in one of your relationships that gives you the insight that you needed. So it comes at you, but what's required is this consistent approach of being available for something to happen, for some transformation. And at its deepest level, contemplation becomes transformational. And that's the second phase after pausing. It's called pivoting. Pivoting is within a pause. Spontaneously, a breakthrough occurs inside us. So if you continue to consider that very difficult thing in your life, and most people don't, because they don't want to, because what we do is we want to distract ourselves from it as much as possible. But actually, the opposite is, like, if we can go towards it gently, it starts to kind of ripen in us, and then we have a breakthrough of some form, and a pivotal moment occurs. So the more pauses we create, the greater the statistical possibility there is that a pivot will occur inside one of those pauses. It always occurs in a pause of some form. And I should say, a pause doesn't have to be still. A pause can be moving. You can be running or swimming or dancing, and you're pausing at the same time. It's a state of relaxedness. It's a state of flow to pause.
Within your mind.
Within your mind, exactly. So you're not anxious in that respect. So maybe I'll pause there so we can kind of assimilate that.
Great. Marina, anything to add to that?
I loved when you write in your book, The Art of Contemplation. You read that contemplation is like a rare and fine tea. It requires steeping. And I absolutely love this. And I am a tea drinker. Full disclosure, yes. So to me, this metaphor speaks so much to the heart, to the way we create our lives, and how valuable it is to actually allow ourselves to be immersed. ongoing commitment to some form of contemplative practice. Yes, so you give wonderful ways of how that can happen. Yes, and I also would like to um, ask you, and Nathan already mentioned that, how the gene keys also allow anyone who is willing to again go in the way of contemplation and go deeper, yes, maybe even a page at a time, a paragraph at a time, a chapter at a time, and also the 64 ways, the recordings, the series of the recordings that you created in your own voice, which is very powerful, how that can be incorporated for someone who is willing to make that commitment, or at the very least willing to give it an honest try.
There's the art of contemplation. I'll finish it so that I kind of, otherwise I'll feel like it's not complete, the story. The third component of it, I love doing things in threes, is you go from pausing to pivoting to merging, and the merging is in a way the kind of, the full transformation has occurred. And so what happens is the breakthrough takes the form of a sort of epiphany. An epiphany is when the contemplation has moved into the cells of our being, and we've actually let go of a pattern of some form, or we've entered into a state of awe or wonder, or peacefulness or compassion. One of those heightened states that are our natural state. So that's the goal, in a way, of contemplation, is to take us into this more merging field that lies behind our problems and behind the phenomena of the world. It's to drop us into there. And so by having several of these pivotal experiences or breakthroughs, we end up kind of finding ourselves more in that we've let go of permanent patterns that were previously embedded in our DNA in some way, that we'd perhaps trauma. Every human being carries trauma. So I'm talking about releasing deeply held traumas through a non-therapeutic method. It is very therapeutic, but it's not a training in any way. You don't need knowledge to get to these traumas. They come out on their own through our everyday life when we create the field of contemplation. So it's incredibly beneficial and healing for our psyche. And it's very, very easy to do. It just requires some basic, little tips. So most people are almost doing it already. I had a man, a New York cab driver, who came to me and said, "You've changed my life, because every time I now reach a red light, instead of being frustrated, I'm like, a pause." I can enjoy it, and I breathe when I'm at the red light. And that's really what it is. It's about coming into a deeper breath. So that's the sort of goal of contemplation, is to take us into, a very open-hearted space inside us, a transcendent space even, but also a normal space. And then you, Marina, mentioned the Gene Keys, which is another body of work that I've created, and it's much more complex. Art of Contemplation is easy, is for anyone. Gene Keys is kind of complex and huge. It's for people who are a little bit more committed to a deep contemplative journey. And because it requires contemplation of specific keys, the Gene Keys is a big book. It took 7 years to write. It's got all these codes in it, and I would not, wish it on anyone unless they really wanted to kind of dive into it. And it is loosely based on Chinese I Ching, which is also a big tome, and it's a way of understanding these patterns, these paradigms and patterns inside us. That gives us a language to contemplate. It gives us shadow patterns specific to us that we can contemplate, and then how we find the gifts in those patterns. And so it's a different way of working. It's a more intense way of working that I found very useful, and many others now. There are lots of applications of it in lots of fields, and people are using it in lots of different ways. So it definitely has an appeal, but I think the contemplative way is the simplest.
It's kind of the step into the bigger gene keys methodology from your perspective. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, although as I said, it's a standalone path in its own right. You don't need anything else. That's why I think it's really beautiful.
Take a moment, if you will, then, because the gene keys piece, I'll admit to I did quite a bit of sleuthing online over the last week to find out more and more about you. I found some interesting videos. So there's um, human design. There's the gene keys piece. It sounds like there's some rootedness in human design or some connection to that process. Maybe talk a bit about your gene keys journey, the development of that. I think, Marina, thank you for bringing that up, because I think we'd like to and I appreciate the fact we probably don't have the time to get into all the detail, but certainly what was the motivation to its discovery, creation, and maybe its connection or not to human design around these aspects? Just be curious from that angle.
Well, for those who know human design, another very fascinating kind of esoteric system, and I studied with the founder of human design for some years. And I was quite close to him, and that's where I kind of immersed myself in that field and got to know it very well. And the founder, Ra, his name was an amazing pattern reader, and so he'd found all these patterns embedded in the Chinese I Ching, and then he put them together with lots of other systems, and created this new system that sort of came to him as an epiphany, as a revelation. And as I was studying with that system, I kind of just I realized at a certain point the language that he was using, it felt very kind of tight and constricting. So I wanted to open up the language. So I started to try to kind of reframe it in a different way, and instead of looking at these different, I opened up each word into three bands, so that the whole thing then became much more of a I don't know, an open source system, so that you could kind of see yourself at different levels of frequency. And this was based on the I mentioned earlier, I'd had this big experience in my 20s, like over 3 days. I had this big transcendent experience in which I kind of realized that we had inside us. I mean, I did experience it sort of deep in my DNA, this sort of light, this intelligence that was there. And not, well, it was just an intelligence that was bigger than me, Richard. It was much bigger. It's transcendent. And so I wanted to capture something of that in the language. And being a linguist and a lover of literature and art and poetry and wine and all of those cultural things, I dove deep into the language and wrote this book, the Gene Keys book, which reframed and recalibrated the language so it suddenly had a lot more space in it. And then it became the Gene Keys, and it sort of became a separate methodology in its own right, with a different approach. It wasn't as, to me, it's not as dogmatic. But I also acknowledge the beauties of human design as well, and usefulness. But yes, at that point, they became two different things, two different paths, and many people use both, and many people find one through the other, and I think they're kind of symbiotic in some respect, but they didn't have to be.
What was striking to me was you seem to have created a real following. I'm noticing some of the TED Talk experiences or TED Talk like experiences that you've hosted. Very lovely overviews that you're providing your audience, bringing them into that conversation. So it seems as though your reach with this information, this material, this new way of thinking about leaning in seems to be having some connection. Yeah, last question I have for you, because Marina, I'll put you on the proverbial, there's no hot seat here, but I'll put you on the hot seat, so to speak, in a moment. How is academia, research, and Gene Keys, if at all, interfacing? Is there any sort of empirical work to see how this transcendent wisdom approach to life is showing up, whether that's through qualitative or quantitative experiences. Maybe there's nothing to it on the academic side. I'd be curious your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, all I say is I'm really open to it. There's one of the reasons I connected with Marina, because I'd really be interested in that kind of research, and not coming from that background myself, not that left brain school. I'm more from the right brain school, although I'm a philosophy student. I would love to track, because some of the things that occur to people as they are contemplating the gene keys, or working with these different systems, because what I see over and over and over again is a lot of transformation occurring in people's lives, and in very, at lots of different levels. And so I would love to explore, what happens when someone learns to pause. What are the subtle changes in their chemistry, in their biology? Does it affect how they, their dietary choices? Does it affect their life choices? I mean, obviously it does. So I'm really interested in that, and exploring. One of the things we talked about with Marina, and maybe you can speak to this, Marina, is having a group of students explore. Perhaps a group of people doing one of my programs. We thought of the Dream Arc, which we might talk about later, which is a very right brain. It's like a physical education program for the right brain. It's like a workout for the right brain. And as we kind of work that muscle of the right brain in lots of different ways, it really changes our life, because we're a very left brain centric world that we live in. And so it brings kind of a new kind of balance to many people's lives. And I'm really interested in, like, how, tracking that. I mean, that's all I can say. I'm really interested in doing that. So I'm open to exploration.
Well, now pause there. You've opened another door that we have to walk into now, Richard. So this is good. So the dream arc. So a brief description of that, and then Marina, I want to shift over to you to talk about research implications, potential applications as well. So Richard, please. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm a lover of collaboration, and I connected with a wonderful woman, Rosie Aronson. And she's a psychologist, and artist, and a fascinating woman with a lot of skills. And we started to work on this program together, and it took us, I think, in total about 7 years, but 3 years creating it online with sort of online wizards and friends. And we put together this, very different from the Gene Keys, much more right brain kind of magical, dream-based, image, visual, musical, collaborative, community-based system. And so the actual program, if you come into the Dream Arc program and you begin it, it's filled with symbolism and symbols, and you click on the symbols, and your right brain is being trained from the beginning, is being encouraged to kind of follow these pathways through, which don't have logic to them. You just, the symbol that you're interested in, you click it, and then it opens up an invitation for you, and that invitation is usually to close your computer and go off and do something. And it could be many things. Some of them are quite challenging. Some of them are working with our hands, and or all kinds of exercises and things. But the purpose behind it is to move into that symbolic language of the right brain, and it does have a profound impact on our dream life. And a lot of the access point is through animal symbolism, and the kind of sort of hidden symbolic dream meanings of animals, and what the ancients or the indigenous people call totems. And so in the program also many interviews with indigenous elders that we did, talking about these things, and talking about the richness of the dream life and our imagination and the power of our intuition. And so a lot of the exercises and things that people do are really honing the intuition and honing the hunter's instinct, or that ancient part of our brain that sees things before they come into our visual field, or senses things before they're here. Um, and so applying that to our everyday life, to our mundane life, that level of kind of enhanced sensory perception is really powerful and transformational as well. So it's a wonderful, rich, extraordinary visual system that was program that was created by many people. It's filled with art, lots of different input from artists, musicians, trauma therapists, you name it, they're in the program. So you're constantly opening up doors that kind of lead to different people's journeys that are inspiring, and they're offering you invitations, and you're encouraged to reach out and actually contact people rather than just being a voyeur. So it's very it stretches us. I hope that kind of puts it into some perspective.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Very, very appreciated, Richard. Thank you. So, Marina, there are so many angles on this with respect to your work at Saybrook and elsewhere, and certainly in the field of uh, consciousness, spirituality, and mental health. You know, you're well aware, living in the United States, clearly we're in the midst of a mental health crisis, right? And trying to unpack where we're at. And I think, Richard, some of what you're talking about, or a lot of what you're talking about today, is also how do we attend to our own emotional and mental well-being. And I think also looking at how do we prepare therapists and the helping professions to better support not just Americans, but our global citizenry in terms of achieving greater wellness and sense of well-being. So can you talk a little bit today about what comes to mind about applying some of Richard's concepts, both in the therapy room and beyond, especially in your work as a psychologist and as well as a researcher and teacher?
Yes, as Richard points out, the way of contemplation and the art of contemplation is really welcome, yes, in therapeutic rooms and therapy rooms, but it is much larger than simply therapeutic room, yes, or therapy room. So to me, having been in transpersonal psychology for a long time, and having an opportunity to work with consciousness, spirituality, and integrative health students at Saybrook, uh, I see and I witness how much students who are professionals in training, yes, this is our future, how much they appreciate receiving tools that are genuinely and authentically empowering individually and collectively. Whether these tools are, and I'm speaking specifically about the art of contemplation, the gene keys, the dream arc, the 64 ways. These are that I had, witnessed internally for myself, but also externally for my students. And again, they're professionals already, but they're also professionals who are committed uh, to alleviating human suffering, yes, who will contribute at that level, past graduation, and will continue to contribute to not only mental health, but overall to the well-being of humanity. And to me, Richard's work represents really an opportunity, no matter where a student is, an individual is, no matter how old the individual is, to take the inside, this seeds, be they seeds of contemplation or seeds of awareness, or an opportunity to introduce and welcome pauses, be they sunlight shining through, or a door opening, or a bark of the dog, or walking the dog, whatever it may be. Yes. And that sense of gentleness that Richard emphasizes throughout his work, it is a gift in and out of itself. When we speak of being gentle with ourselves, all of a sudden something softens inside us. All of a sudden we are more attuned to what is happening for us, and we are willing, yes, willing to go in a different way. Is an interesting story. My dog Star, who is now, he's going to be 6 on the 17th, St. Patrick's Day. But when I got him, he's a rescue. The first word that he learned how to understand really well on the spot, it was gentle, gentle. I just couldn't believe it. When I was teaching him how he needs to take something out of my hand, I was telling him gentle, gentle. And all of a sudden, he got it. So there's something transcendent that goes well beyond human awareness, that goes with that energy of gentleness, not simply a word, but energy. So to me, when we speak about opportunities for healing, opportunities for gentle awareness, opportunities for collaboration, opportunities for being together in a shared space of understanding that as humanity, we experience A through Z, the whole alphabet of human emotions, events, happenings, and finding that temple within to which Richard speaks, to me, is a healing path. A person would not need to have license in anything. A person does not need to be equipped in, you know, anything technical. A person does not need to be research savvy to apply the grains of wisdom in the art of contemplation, the grains of wisdom that are also seated, in a, as Richard mentioned, in a much more complex body of work, but it's an open body of work, right? It is not a locked system as gene keys. And the dream arc, all a person would need to do is say, aha, this animal is showing up. Let's say coyote showed up for me not that long ago. And I went right away to 64 ways, and the gene keys, this is what that means. Here we go. And this is common in my life. I need to remember this. So, for instance, in gene keys, there are 3 keywords for each a gene key. And in another system, it can be related again to the dream arc, to an animal, right? So that there are many ways to connect the left and the right brain. And very briefly, Nathan and Richard, about this wonderful opportunity for Saybrook to continue to find ways, yes, to be with and find wisdom in the systems. So I see it as, Saybrook is absolutely wonderful in uh, having capacity to integrate both the left and the right. Qualitative research is alive and well and flourishing, and there is attention, needed attention given to quantitative. So to me, we're only beginning here to look at the possibilities, but Kervin Rockefeller has, and I have already had a conversation in the fall about what could that be, and Kervin is in our RB committee. So I look forward to seeing how we can incorporate it. But one example, for instance, Saybrook is known for those who are innovating. For instance, late Dr. Sandy Smith developed a method while being at Saybrook and actually wrote her dissertation using that method that is called heuristic self-search inquiry. It is based on Clark Mustaka's heuristic research, but it is emphasizing the researcher, yes, as the only participant in the journey of self-discovery. And Richard approached to contemplation as an art, as well as the gene key systems, as well as the 64 ways and the dream arc, are tools for that self-discovery that any student who feels attuned to and resonant with his work can bring this as tools um, to be considered and potentially incorporated in that work. And this is only an example. So possibilities are many.
Oh my gosh, yes. And it strikes me as, with Richard, your interest in how does this affect the brain, the neurochemistry even of the brain, and then also the, Marina, all of the rich points that you raised just now. There's definitely a merging and an opportunity to um, exploit's not the best word, but I'll use exploit for lack of a better word. Exploiting the mixed modal research designs to really bring out the life of this. I mean, as you both probably know, I mean, there's such a body of research now in neuropsychology in meditation practices, right? In terms of what areas of the brain are being activated, deactivated, etc. This could certainly be an interesting point to start looking at. Marina, I have some very good friends out on the East Coast who do this work, so maybe there's some opportunities for some connectivity there as well.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we're at the end of our time together. It's been a joy to meet with both of you. I know it's early in the morning for you, Marina. Richard, it's dinner time, I think, in your neck of the woods.
Tea time.
Tea time. Yes. Okay. Yeah. My daughter actually lives in that area where you're at, so she said to say hello. Um, so the final two questions I have for my guests in every episode is we'll start with the first one. What does the term humanistic mean to you? And these are very quick takes. Richard, why don't you go first?
Well, the first thing I think of when I think of humanistic is from my philosophy years and remembering back to Erasmus, I think I coined it,
Yes.
and I remember. So I'm plumbing my memory, but I seem to remember that Erasmus was one of the kind of major proponents of the Trinity, and the Christian Trinity, but I think he extended it into like a lot of different areas. And I'm a lover of three trinities. The three, I find it comes up in everywhere in all the teachings of all the philosophies of all the ages. So I love the fact that kind of lineage has come down. That's one thing I think of. The other thing I think of is that there's an indigenous saying. The human is the dream of the dolphin, which is beautiful. I think is that a dolphin, something as beautiful and incredible as a dolphin, its highest dream is to be born as a human. That's the idea, and so for me that's the other way of looking at humanistic. Like it's to really appreciate and be grateful for what we are and who we are and what we're capable of and where we could go, and to really appreciate if something as epic as a dolphin could wish to be us in its highest dreams. Wow, what a privilege it is to be inside one of these. So anyway, that's
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Marina?
Yes, thank you, Richard, so much. To me, humanistic is so many things, but for the moment, it is about belonging rather than cultivating, nourishing belonging rather than othering, to cultivating love rather than indifference, and to also embodying the highest values that touch our hearts, that somehow claim us. So embodiment would be a big one, and this is where Richard's works come in.
It was very beautiful, both of you. That was lovely. Last question. We're going to take it in pairs here. So, Marina, we're going to start with you, and Richard, you're going to take us out, basically. So, given all that's going on right now in the world, given all the struggles people have, but also the joys that people have, if you could help center our audience, like what's one thing an individual can do right now? Three things, rather. Three things an individual can do right now to improve their mental, emotional, and or physical well-being. Marina?
One would be tender attention to life honoring attitude and behavior and habits, simply noticing. Second one would be developing some form of ritual or spiritual or contemplative practice, hopefully daily. Perhaps it's lighting a candle, noticing sunset, saying hi to the neighbor daily, whatever it may be, connecting. And the third would be a big one for me would be investing in self-tending. Richard's work also speaks to that a great deal because this is where the real work is when we are willing and able to go the extra mile each day, maybe a minute, maybe 5, maybe 20, to self-tend in ways that we are taking care of that gift of life we're given. Things get better.
Richard?
Well, beautiful. I mean, my first one is a bit similar to that, Marina, not surprisingly, and it's what you said earlier, which is the gentleness. Gentleness is, we humans are very hard on ourselves, and so if we can reverse that in a little bit, just by being gentle on oneself, it just really takes the pressure off our lives, off our minds, off the weight that we carry, off our, so there's so many ways that you can begin to apply that, but you start with yourself, and once you start learning to, as you said, self-care, to take care of yourself better, then it starts to radiate out. You start being gentler towards others, and in your relationships has a big effect. Another one is, which I mentioned, pausing. Pausing. If you can find, even at the end of today, listening to this, if you heard this, if you can just find one extra pause and give that gift to yourself, and it can be 5 minutes with your feet up, or it can be putting on a piece of music, or it can be a bath, or it can be something that you get, it goes in hand with gentleness, right? You give yourself a moment, you give yourself a bit longer than you would have done otherwise. And then when you get to the end of the day, and it might be at the end of the day even, you've really you kind of know that you've had like an exquisite moment of some form in your day. And the other one would be the third one would be at the other end of the day. And not everyone maybe wants to do this, but I find it the most incredible practice. And it's just getting up a little bit earlier than you normally want to or would, and being up before before life arrives. So being up just as life begins to arrive. Maybe it's with the birds, maybe it's, it was early in the morning. There are the energy and the silence and the preciousness. It's tailor-made for the contemplative state. So if you can get up a little bit earlier, before your jobs start, before you open your screen, before you do anything else, before you eat. And I have a little tea practice like Marina, so I sit there with a little cup of tea or hot water and with a rose in it or something, and then I sit there, and the dawn, sometimes before the dawn, depends on where you are. That could be incredibly early, but it's before everyone else is up. If you're in a house like me with busyness and children and all of that, I make sure I'm up before everyone else, even if it's 5 minutes, just so there's that quietness. And that as a practice is invaluable, because it creates the resonance in your life and it sets your whole day. It's hard, just making that effort at the beginning, but then you start to crave it, and that's a beautiful thing. So yeah, that will be mine.
Amen to that. Wonderful, beautiful job, both of you today. Richard, where can people find you on the World Wide Web?
Yeah, very easy. genekeys.com. And it's all in there. Art of Contemplation, Dream Arc. It's a little journey, and you can explore to your heart's content. And YouTube, I have a channel there, and the usual things. Amazon, my books are on Amazon.
And Richard Rudd, 2 Ds at the end there. And Dr. Smirnova, how about you? Where can people find you on the web?
Saybrook faculty profile would be a good start. And the second one would be marinasmirnova.com.
Very good. Thank you both so much. Have a lovely day. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Richard. What a pleasure.
Thank you, Marina.
Richard and Marina, thank you very much for your time today, and a really fascinating interview. Hope you all enjoyed both of these individuals as much as I did. Remember the 3 major, and today it's 6 major takeaways, right? For Dr. Smirnova: attention to life-honoring attitudes, behaviors, and habits. I love this one. Really spend time thinking about and applying those life-honoring attitudes. Number 2, develop some form of ritual, spiritual, or contemplative practice. I'm just going to deviate from my typical here and say I have found great benefit from this process, this protocol or procedure, this ritual practice, if you will. And I learned it at Saybrook when I started as president here some 9 years ago. And that practice, that ritual practice, is every morning for me anyway. I journal and I meditate. So whatever it is for you, whether, as Marina said, lighting a candle or meditation or just pausing, take that time. And then lastly, investing in self-tending. Richard Rudd suggests 3, particularly be gentle on yourself. And he's absolutely right. We're very hard on ourselves, and by being gentle, by actively being gentle, this takes the pressure off of our lives and minds. Number 2 is pausing. Really like this concept. If you can find one extra pause in your day and give that gift to yourself, whether it's listening to music, just kicking your feet up, whatever it is, take that pause. And lastly, getting up a little bit earlier, whether it's 5 minutes or an hour, to start your day right before life arrives. If you want to see the video of today's interview, please visit our Saybrook YouTube page. And if you'd like to support the podcast, go to Apple iTunes and leave a 5-star rating and review, and subscribe so you can get the episodes as they come out. And you know the drill on Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating. Make sure to follow us. You can, of course, subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, including Google, Stitcher, Pandora, and many others. Remember to check our show notes for information on today's guests, including links to websites, books, etc. You heard Richard's connection to genekeys.com, and of course Marina's website, as well as her faculty profile page here at Saybrook University. For more about our psychology program, in which Dr. Smirnova teaches in, or the university, go to www.saybrook.edu, click on Areas of Study at the top of the page, and locate the program to learn more. Or simply Google Saybrook University Psychology Program. All right, everyone, take care, be well, take those pauses. We'll see you next time.